30 April 1980, 11:30 in the morning, London. 26 hostages are inside the Iranian Embassy at 16 Prince's Gate, Kensington. 6 men with automatic weapons put them there 4 days ago, and the negotiators have given them everything they've asked for. Media access, a bus to Heathrow, promises about Iranian political prisoners, and none of it has been enough. The leader, Oan Ali Mohammed, is standing at the first-floor window with a megaphone. He is about to shoot someone. And in a house across the street, a man in a suit who isn't in the army, who holds no military rank, who answers to a politician, is about to give an order that will authorise the SAS to enter a building in central London on live television and kill. The official version of what happened in the next 17 minutes is that everything went precisely to plan. Witness testimony said otherwise. Witness accounts, including from a hostage who was present in the room, described 2 of the 6 men being shot after they had raised their hands above their heads. The regiment's name would never be the same afterwards, and neither would the question of what rules apply when the state kills on home soil in broad daylight while the cameras are running. Operation Nimrod wasn't merely the SAS's finest public moment. It was the first time a democratic government authorised what amounted to a summary execution posture on home soil in public and called it a rescue. To understand the decisions made at Prince's Gate, you first need to understand who the 6 men were, because every hagiographic treatment of Nimrod either doesn't bother to ask or answers the question with a single word: terrorists. That answer is legally accurate and analytically useless. At 11:30 on the morning of the 30th of April 1980, 6 men walked into the Iranian Embassy at 16 Prince's Gate, carrying their weapons in lightweight holdalls. Police Constable Trevor Locke, a diplomatic protection group officer, was the first person they overpowered. He was drinking coffee inside the front door with the concierge when the group came through. Locke, who understood within seconds what was happening, covertly sent a distress signal on his radio before he was subdued. Locke also carried a concealed revolver throughout all 6 days of the siege. He never drew it. The 6 men were members of the Democratic Revolutionary Movement for the Liberation of Arabistan, also transliterated as the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan, depending on who is rendering the Arabic. The organization was the same. Their cause was rooted in a part of Iran that most British people had never heard of and have largely forgotten since. Khuzestan province, in Iran's southwestern corner, where the Arab population had historically resisted Persian dominance, and where approximately 10% of the world's oil production originated in 1980. As one historian put it bluntly, without Khuzestan, Iran couldn't function as a significant regional power. The grievance had become acute after 1979. Khomeini's Islamic Revolution had promised Arab minorities a degree of autonomy that wasn't delivered. When protests swept across Khuzestan that year, Tehran's response was force. More than 100 Arab demonstrators killed, hundreds imprisoned. 91 of those prisoners were the direct demand the 6 men brought with them to Prince's Gate. They also wanted Arabistan's formal autonomy recognised and safe passage out of the United Kingdom once their demands were met. Iran's government responded publicly and immediately. The gunmen were mercenaries, said Tehran, and the prisoners wouldn't be released. The British and Iranian governments were therefore aligned on the core question of what the men wouldn't be getting. Nor was this the only obstacle the gunmen had not been told about. There was a 7th man. The Metropolitan Police investigation of the siege identified him as Sami Mohammed Ali, an Iraqi intelligence officer who recruited the group in Baghdad, trained them, supplied their weapons and grenades once they reached England, told them they would return to Iraq as heroes within 24 hours, and flew out of Heathrow before the embassy was seized. He was gone before the police had finished identifying how many people were inside the building. He faced no consequence. The group's operational leader was Oan Ali Mohammed, codename Salim. Of the other 5, only Fawzi Badawi Nejad emerges in any detail from the historical record. 22 years old at the time of the siege, alias Ali, and the only one who would leave the building alive. The British public in 1980 had no frame for any of this. The siege unfolded against a backdrop of IRA mainland bombing campaigns and the American hostage crisis in Tehran, both contexts that were far more legible to Fleet Street than a separatist grievance from an Iranian province most editors had never heard of. The Arabistani cause registered barely at all. But these were political actors with a documented cause, however indefensible their methods. When 5 of them died without trial, without charge, and without legal representation, they died with the same rights under British law as any other person on British soil. That tension between the tactical necessity, the government would argue, and the legal framework that was supposed to govern the use of lethal force is what the subsequent 17 minutes could never fully resolve. Margaret Thatcher was nearly a year into her first term when the embassy fell. The 1979 Conservative campaign had been explicit about the contrast with Labour's handling of political violence and industrial disruption. Terrorism was a test of governance, and she intended to pass it. Her position was clear, and it didn't shift. Negotiation with terrorists. No safe passage. No prisoner releases. She would pursue a peaceful resolution as long as that remained possible, and she had authorised lethal force if a hostage was killed. In practice, this meant the 6 negotiators working rotating shifts at Prince's Gate were buying time rather than seeking a resolution. The fundamental British position, which happened to coincide with Tehran's position on the prisoners, never moved. The crisis management mechanism was COBRA, the Cabinet Office briefing room, chaired by Home Secretary William Whitelaw, who was present at the forward command throughout all 6 days. In 1980, COBRA had not been tested in earnest before the siege. Before 30 April, it had never been deployed at full operational pitch against a domestic counter-terrorism scenario. It had no established legal status beyond being an ad hoc cabinet subcommittee mechanism, and its authority to direct military force on British streets was, in the words of one academic study, not tested in earnest until that week. The negotiations themselves produced incremental tactical concessions. Media access was granted. On day 4, the gunmen's statement was read verbatim on BBC News in exchange for the release of 2 hostages. Mustafa Karkouti, the Syrian journalist who was among the hostages and spoke Arabic, had spent days persuading the gunmen to negotiate at all. Arab ambassador mediation was discussed and went nowhere. The Saudis declined to participate. Jordan's ambassador declined. Only the PLO offered intermediaries. Lord Carrington circulated a telegram to Middle Eastern embassies stating the government was determined to end the siege, if possible without bloodshed. Mr. Vernon, one of the lead negotiators, later said he felt he had failed, that a negotiated resolution was achievable, but political conditions didn't permit one. The contrast with Washington was implicit and deliberate. Carter had managed the American hostage crisis in Tehran for 444 days. Operation Eagle Claw, the Delta Force attempt to rescue those hostages, had collapsed in an Iranian desert less than 2 weeks before the Prince's Gate siege began, killing 8 American servicemen. Britain was about to offer a different model on television. One post-operation account from a single source records that smoke generators that would have obscured the assault from cameras weren't deployed on direct instruction from the Prime Minister, who wanted the international media to see how Britain handled terrorism. That specific instruction can't be independently verified. But the choice to conduct the operation in full view of all 3 television channels on Bank Holiday Monday evening, peak viewership, was made by the same government that authorised it. The cameras weren't an accident. The formal legal basis for deploying the SAS on London streets was military aid to the civil power, MACP, grounded in the Emergency Powers Act 1964 and broader prerogative powers whose precise scope remained contested in constitutional literature. What isn't contested is how the procedural chain actually functioned on the ground at Prince's Gate. As Corporal Robin Horsfall of 22 SAS, one of the operators on the assault team, explained in a 2025 account, before we could launch any attack, the police would have to officially hand over control to the military. In a sudden emergency, this could be done by the senior police officer on the ground. But if we were carrying out a planned assault, permission would be requested by the police commissioner from the Home Secretary, William Whitelaw, who would, in turn, refer the request to the Prime Minister. That chain was followed. While the negotiators worked in the foreground, B Squadron, 22 SAS, had been operating in parallel throughout the 6 days. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rose had taken the initiative of driving his men south on the evening of the 30th of April, before official channels had formally requested them. The following days were spent constructing and rehearsing the assault sequence at a full-scale mock-up of the embassy's internal layout at Regent's Park Barracks, a few miles from Prince's Gate. The operation that became Nimrod was planned and rehearsed many times over before the political decision to authorise it was ever made. At approximately 13:45 on the afternoon of May 5th, Abbas Lavasani was executed inside the building. He had been arguing with the gunmen throughout the siege and had reportedly told them he was willing to die as a martyr. His body was pushed out of the front door at approximately 1900. A forensic pathologist who examined the body at 1855 estimated he had been dead for at least an hour before examination. The execution crossed the pre-established threshold. At 19:07, 7 minutes past 7 on Bank Holiday Monday evening, Deputy Assistant Commissioner John Dello, the ranking Metropolitan Police Officer at Prince's Gate, signed a handwritten note, formally transferring operational control from the Metropolitan Police to Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rose. The note authorised Rose to order an assault at his discretion. That document is preserved today at New Scotland Yard's Crime Museum. The rules of engagement governing what the SAS operators could do once that transfer took effect had been worked out before 1907. They weren't produced in evidence at the subsequent inquest. They have never been publicly disclosed. What discretion was actually delegated, specifically whether the authority to order lethal force reached all the way down to individual operator level in the specific circumstances of each death, is a question contested in secondary academic literature and unanswered in any primary document accessible to the public. Rose chose 1923 as the moment, 16 minutes after the handover. At 1923, Operation Nimrod commenced. B Squadron deployed as Red Team and Blue Team, between 30 and 35 operators in total. 4 Red Team members abseiled from the roof down the rear of the building. 4 more lowered stun grenades through the skylight. At the front, Blue Team detonated frame charges on a first-floor window. The assault was designed to be simultaneous, front, rear, skylight, both balconies, calculated to overwhelm any coherent defensive response before it could form. On the rear abseil, the sequence departed from the rehearsed plan immediately. Warrant Officer First Class Goodyear, leading the descent, became entangled in his rope. While colleagues tried to free him, one of the abseilers accidentally broke a window with his foot. The sound carried inside the building. Oan, Salim, was on the first floor communicating with police negotiators. He went to investigate the noise. The stun grenades detonating below started a fire that caught the curtains and travelled back up to Goodyear's rope. He was badly burned. A second wave of abseilers cut him free. He fell to the balcony below and entered the building behind the rest of his team. As SAS operators came through multiple entry points and converged on the first-floor landing, PC Trevor Locke, carrying his concealed revolver for the 6th consecutive day without drawing it, tackled Oan to prevent him firing at the approaching soldiers. Oan was still armed. One of the operators shot him dead. Corporal Robin Horsfall was among those who reached that landing. In the rooms where the male hostages had been held, the gunmen began moving their captives as the assault began. Through corridors, between rooms, mixing armed men with civilians in conditions calculated to make rapid discrimination between combatants and non-combatants extremely difficult. One gunman, who produced a hand grenade when identified among evacuating hostages, was physically pushed down the stairs by an operator who couldn't fire without risking colleagues or hostages. 2 soldiers at the foot of the stairwell shot him. In the telex room, 2 gunmen died. On the live broadcast outside, carried simultaneously by all 3 television channels, a white flag was visible in a second-floor window before the shooting in that room stopped. BBC journalist Kate Adie was reporting live from outside the building. The BBC had been broadcasting the World Snooker Championship final when the assault began. Millions of people were watching the storming of 16 Prince's Gate in real time. On the front balcony, Staff Sergeant John McAleese appeared holding an MP5, the image printed on every newspaper front page the following morning and reproduced ever since as the defining photograph of the modern SAS. Sim Harris, the BBC sound recordist held hostage for 6 days, later described how he crawled onto the rear balcony as the fire spread inside. The room was burning from the grenades, and he was prepared to jump if it came to it. He thought a broken leg was a price worth paying to get out. Fauzi Badavi Nejad, 22 years old, survived by mixing himself into the group of surviving hostages. He was led away. He was the only gunman taken alive. The assault lasted 17 minutes. 5 gunmen were dead. 1 was in custody. 19 hostages were freed. Abbas Lavasani, executed hours before the assault began, was already in the hands of a forensic pathologist. Thatcher went directly to Regent's Park Barracks that evening to meet the regiment. Maury measured her approval rating at approximately 70% in May 1980. 9 months after the siege, in approximately February 1981, a coroner's inquest opened into the deaths of the 5 gunmen. It was held at Westminster Coroner's Court. The presiding coroner was Paul Knapman, HM Coroner for Westminster and Inner West London, who, over the following 3 decades, would also preside over the Marchioness disaster, the Harrods bombing, and the death of WPC Yvonne Fletcher. He died in April 2026, aged 81. The jury returned a unanimous verdict: justifiable homicide. In contemporary English inquest law, that terminology has since been replaced by the phrase lawful killing, but the legal meaning is the same. The jury concluded that all 5 deaths were legally justified. The SAS operators who testified stated in each case that they believed the men were reaching for weapons at the moment of shooting. The jury accepted this. That is the official record. What sits alongside it is more complicated. Ahmad Dadgar was one of the hostages, an embassy staff member. Speaking on BBC television in 2002, he described what he witnessed in the telex room. Both were sitting there and put their hands on their head. Then several SAS men came in. They took the two terrorists and pushed them on the wall and shot them. Other witnesses interviewed for the same 2002 BBC documentary corroborated Dadgar's account. The white flag visible in the live broadcast was consistent with what he described. Mustafa Karkouti, the Syrian journalist who had spent 6 days communicating directly with the gunmen in Arabic, described them in the final hours as frightened, badly prepared, and genuinely surprised by the speed and ferocity of what hit them. None of this suggests men in a fighting posture at the moment Dadgar was describing. None of this testimony was aired at the 1981 inquest. Dadgar's account didn't become public until 2002, 21 years after the jury returned its verdict. A Guardian report from July 2002 added a further dimension. SAS team members told the programme they believe Thatcher had communicated before the assault that she didn't want an ongoing problem beyond the embassy. The newspaper characterised this as the team understanding they had been told not to take prisoners. This is a single-source retrospective account, 2 decades removed from the event, and it can't be independently verified against the primary record. But consider what the primary record does show. Within days of the operation, the Foreign Office began drafting immunity documentation. National Archives files released in December 2010 under the 30-year rule contain a pro forma agreement being prepared for future SAS deployments overseas, which included explicit language. Immunity from prosecution and all claims in the event of causing casualties, life insurance, and so on. The Guardian's headline on the story was unambiguous: SAS to be given immunity for killing foreigners. The relevant cabinet file is PREM 19/1137. Security, seizure of Iranian Embassy in South Kensington and the taking of hostages, April to May 1980. Held at the National Archives and accessible through the Margaret Thatcher Foundation archive. The specific content of Thatcher's deliberations, including any handwritten annotations on the authorisation decision, remains the subject of ongoing historical scrutiny. What the post-operation Foreign Office documents reveal is that the government's immediate institutional concern wasn't whether the killing of 5 men required examination. It was how to protect future operators from legal consequences before any future operation had even been proposed. The rules of engagement for Operation Nimrod were worked out before the formal handover at 1907. They weren't produced in evidence at the 1981 inquest. They weren't disclosed to the jury. Whether they explicitly permitted shooting men with their hands above their heads is a question nobody at the inquest was required to answer. No operator was prosecuted following the inquest. The verdict was accepted. The Kuwaiti ambassador rang the Middle East Department of the Foreign Office to offer congratulations. An Iranian official described himself as effusive in his thanks. Fauzi Badavi Najad was tried in 1981 on charges of conspiracy to murder, false imprisonment, and possessing firearms with intent. He received a life sentence. In October 2008, after 27 years, he was released on parole from an open prison. Deportation to Iran would expose him to prosecution and likely execution. He remained in the United Kingdom on human rights grounds. He gave extensive interviews to British journalists in the months after his release. He is the only surviving participant who can describe what happened inside the building. The 5 men who can't say what happened to them left no account. The morning after the assault, the government was already planning the next one. Foreign Office files released under the 30-year rule show that within days of the operation, senior British diplomats were anticipating a fresh wave of requests for SAS training teams to visit well-disposed Middle Eastern countries. The template for managing these requests was formalised under the codename Operation Pulpit. The immunity pro forma was drafted specifically for this purpose. When the SAS was sent to resolve a hostage situation on foreign soil at a friendly government's request, legal protection needed to be agreed in advance. One Foreign Office official was already sceptical about the paperwork. If the operation was a success, there would probably be no problem about payment. But if things went badly, it seems doubtful that the government concerned would pay up willingly. The Ministry of Defence insisted the Foreign Office should cover the cost. The argument about who would pay was easier than the argument about whether it was legal. For the SAS as an institution, Nimrod changed everything and nothing simultaneously. The regiment's existence had been officially acknowledged since the 1960s, but its operations were classified and its operators were anonymous. After May 5, 1980, John McAleese's image on the balcony had been broadcast live to millions and reprinted on every front page. The regiment was world famous overnight. Its operators were never officially named. Its rules of engagement remained unpublished. The accountability gap that opened in those 17 minutes was never formally closed. The American Delta Force, created in 1977, predated Nimrod. But Eagle Claw had been a catastrophe. Nimrod was the proof of concept that Western governments had been waiting for. A live television demonstration that a small, superbly trained unit could assault a fortified urban building, recover hostages, and control the outcome in 17 minutes. After 1980, every Western government that established or expanded a hostage rescue unit cited the Iranian Embassy as the demonstration model. The doctrine of simultaneous multi-point entry, stun grenades, close-quarters combat in a confined urban structure, all of it had been publicly demonstrated on the BBC. In Northern Ireland, the same authority structure continued operating. On the 8th of May 1987, 8 members of the IRA's East Tyrone Brigade attacked the RUC station at Loughgall in County Armagh with a JCB loader carrying £500 of explosives. The SAS was waiting with an ambush. All 8 were killed. Their weapons were later linked to 40 to 50 murders in Fermanagh and Tyrone. The Irish Foreign Affairs Minister wrote to the Northern Ireland Secretary 3 days later, asking whether such a large number of casualties, including the civilian casualty, could have been avoided. One civilian, Anthony Hughes, had been shot dead in the crossfire. No SAS operator faced prosecution. No rules of engagement were produced in evidence. Operation Flavius, which this channel has covered in detail, followed in Gibraltar in March 1988. 3 IRA members were shot dead by undercover SAS operators on a public street. None of the 3 were armed. None had a remote detonator. The car, suspected of containing a bomb, contained no explosives. The European Court of Human Rights ruled in 1995 in McCann and Others versus United Kingdom that Article 2 of the European Convention, the right to life, had been violated. The court didn't find an execution plot at the highest level of government or the Ministry of Defence. What it found was that the operation wasn't organised and controlled as to minimise, to the greatest extent possible, recourse to lethal force. Inadequate planning, alternatives not genuinely considered. That standard, applied retrospectively to Prince's Gate, would generate questions the 1981 inquest was never asked to answer. Were the SAS operators given any meaningful option other than shooting in the telex room? Were the rules of engagement framed in a way that made killing the default outcome once contact was established? Were the witnesses who could have addressed this ever heard? In 1984, Deputy Chief Constable John Stalker of Greater Manchester Police was appointed to investigate a series of killings by the RUC and SAS in Northern Ireland. He found no written shoot-to-kill instructions. What he found, in his own subsequent account, was a clear pattern. His inquiry was terminated before its conclusions were formally delivered. The files were classified. The pattern Stalker was trying to name, lethal force used in contested circumstances under rules of engagement that were never articulated publicly, producing deaths consistently found justified by inquests that didn't hear the most damaging testimony, had its clearest precedent in Kensington on the evening of Bank Holiday Monday, May 5, 1980, while the cameras were still running. The government never formally published the rules of engagement that governed Operation Nimrod. They've never had to. The SAS operator, whose image appeared on every front page the following morning, has never been officially identified. The 5 men who died at 16 Prince's Gate had no trial, no charge sheet, and no representation. The one survivor, Fawzi Badavi Najad, convicted in 1981 and released in October 2008 after 27 years, has given extensive interviews about what he witnessed inside the building. He remains in the United Kingdom. The deportation Iran has requested would expose him to execution. The 1981 inquest returned its unanimous verdict. The government noted the findings. No prosecution followed. The Foreign Office had been drafting the immunity documentation before the coroner was even appointed. In the 17 minutes that made the SAS famous, something else was also settled, quietly, officially, in a way that would never need to be litigated again. What the state may do when it decides the time has come and the cameras are already running. Subscribe for more stories like this.